The Jets get a win to open their preseason, but more importantly, they get some standout performances from some key young players. Let's break it down today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, August 12th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Well, today we have a preseason game to break down. The Jets beat the Washington Commanders Saturday at MetLife Stadium, 20-17. We're going to break down that game on today's show. So the Jets start their preseason 1-0, but as we know, preseason records don't really matter because the guys who decide these games aren't really key players for your team. And look, these games don't count in the standings. You know, once we get to week one, the games start counting on the standings. The wins or losses will directly contribute to the Jets making or missing the playoffs. These games do not count. I mean, I don't know if there's like some preseason. I don't think there's any preseason championship award. I don't even think there's like a preseason division championship because there's only 3 games. So, you know, the end result doesn't matter. I guess you'd like to see the Jets win rather than lose, but I focus more on individual performances because there are certain players who will either stand out in these games or play poorly. And these are players who have questions about them. You're trying to figure out what they're going to be this season for your team. And I think there were lots of good things to come from this game from the New York Jets on Saturday. And I think we could begin by talking about the rookie class. I think this was a very strong start to the preseason for the rookie class by the New York Jets. Now, Robert Saleh likes to sit down, he likes to sit most of his key players during preseason. You know, there might be a game or two where they get a series or two, but for the most part, the rookies sit. For the most part, the starters sit. The exception is the rookies, because the starters, Saleh doesn't like to risk getting them injured, but it's felt like, and this has been true since he took over the team in 2021, it's felt like he wants to get the rookies acclimated to NFL game situations. So the rookies, even if they're starters, they play. Now, I actually don't think there are any members of the rookie class for the Jets this year who are projected to be starters, which in some ways makes these reps even more important during the preseason because it's going to be their one opportunity to simulate game action for a long time. And the Jets may need to call on some of these players at some point during the regular season. So you want to have these guys as prepared as possible. And I think the standout of, we're talking the rookies on Saturday, was Braylon Allen, who ripped off 54 yards on 6 carries. His long was 24 yards, ripped off a pair of long runs. And actually I have an article going up today on GangGreenNation.com about his vision, because these were both of the big runs were zone runs. And essentially the hole they were trying to hit was not open. So Allen essentially found a different hole and just exploded through it both times. There was one where he cut inside, where he did a cutback, which is pretty common when you're talking about a zone run play. You know, your back essentially you have one spot your back's running to initially. Then his job is to essentially scan the field to find where the hole is and then hit it as fast as possible. And Allen did that. And then there was another one where he broke outside, where the hole he was running to was clogged, but he saw an opening on the outside and he exploded to the outside. And I've talked about this a little on the show, and I've written about it a little bit on GangGreenNation.com that, the Jets drafted Allen. He's 235, 245, big back, one of the bigger backs you'll see in the NFL. And I think that there is a tendency to typecast a back like this and just say, oh, he's a power back. He just lowers his shoulder. He'll grind out tough yardage. And look, I think that that's true. I think it's true of Allen that he will be able to grind out tough yardage. But I think it's unfair sometimes that we typecast backs like this, because he showed you burst. And he looked like the Braylon Allen of that freshman year at Wisconsin. He was 17 years old. He was supposed to be a senior in high school. He ran for almost 7 yards per carry on snaps where he was facing an 8-man box. So not only was he a tough runner, he was explosive. And then last 2 years, he hasn't been quite as explosive. He's dealt with some injuries. I think maybe he put on a little bit too much muscle last year. And that was part of the reason he fell to the 4th round. And I think the hope now around the Jets is that maybe they found a steal. That's the hope. I mean, so far, everything that would suggest they may have found a steal has panned out. Now, there's still a long way to go. I don't want to go too crazy over a handful of preseason carries. He's going up against backups. But, the running back's one of those positions I look at. I always talk about the positions that are tough to transfer to the NFL. I talk about the techniques that are different. Running back is not, look, there's no position where it's easy to transfer to the NFL from college, but it's a position that I think requires less to learn because you get the handoff and you either can make it happen with the ball in your hands or you can't. Yeah, I mean, there's some footwork things you could probably drill into guys. There's also pass protection, which Allen actually I think did pretty decently on Saturday. But you either have the ability to hit the hole and go get upfield or you don't. And Allen had 2 very impressive runs in this game. And look, the Jets are looking for that guy who can give Breece Hall a breather. You don't have to give. Last year in New England, the Week 18 game, Breece Hall got the ball like 37 times. You don't have to do that. You want to give Breece. You don't want to have to run Breece into the ground. You want to have a back you can trust who can take some of the carries off, take some of the workload off Breece. And it's starting to get exciting around Braylon Allen. I'm not ready to go there yet after one preseason game, but I'm getting there. I'm really, my optimism level is growing around Braylon Allen. And I think I also need to talk about Olu Fashanu, who I thought played a really solid game. Now, he went out there and committed a penalty on the first snap he was out there, which I'm going to go ahead and say this is a kid who's in his first NFL game. I know it's preseason, his first NFL game, his first NFL snap, maybe a little fired up, maybe a little nervous. I'm going to say that the penalty maybe had something to do with that, your first snap. But other than that, I was keying on him and I thought he looked pretty solid. And, I went to a couple of the statistical sites that track this stuff and I watched it myself and I did not see him give up a pressure in the game. I did not see any statistical website that covers this stuff put a pressure on him. And he played, he played into the second quarter. He played about a half of football. So pretty good. And, I think about expectations for a guy like Olu Fashanu. And what have we talked about on the show? What have I said? I said, when Olu Fashanu steps in for Tyron Smith this year, because Tyron Smith's going to be banged up at some point. Fashanu's going to have to go in there. What are my expectations for him? I want him to hold his own. Look, I don't need him to be a Pro Bowler this year. He's going to be a backup. I don't think you expect your backups to be Pro Bowlers. I don't think even an 11th overall pick you expect to be a Pro Bowler. Of course, you're happy if you get it, but that's not the expectation. The expectation is you're hoping he looks like he belongs out there. Like he looks like he can hold his own. And how would that translate to an NFL preseason game? Well, in an NFL preseason game, you're going to be going up against a lot of guys who are like backups, third stringers. So a tackle who holds his own against starters, and that's what I want Olu Fashanu to be. When he faces second and third teamers in preseason, I'm expecting him to look great. I'm expecting him to dominate. And I mean, did Fashanu dominate? I mean, I don't know if I'd say dominated, but I thought he looked pretty darn good. And his first preseason action, and Robert Saleh indicated that they're going to give him a lot of work in the preseason for some of the reasons I've talked about on the show just now, where he's not going to be a starter. So this is an opportunity to get game reps. They're going to use this as an opportunity, this game and the next two, to develop him, to try and get him as up to speed as possible for when the team will inevitably need to call on him during the season to step in. And hopefully it won't be for that long. Hopefully it'll be for a couple of games. Hopefully Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses stay really healthy. But Fashanu's there. He's going to be the first guy in. And that's a key player. As I say frequently on the show, in today's NFL, you need 3 starting tackles. You need 3 starting caliber tackles. And I think Fashanu off to a good start. But you also need depth. And here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to talk about some of the young players on defense who aren't going to be starters this year for this team, but guys who maybe took a step toward making a roster spot and giving the Jets quality depth, one on the defensive line, one in the back of the defense. We'll talk about who they are and why they stood out today as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. The Jets, of course, have a scouting staff. They have a front office. They can find great players for their team without LinkedIn Jobs. But your business, you probably don't have a scouting staff or a front office. Let LinkedIn be your scouting staff or front office. LinkedIn's not just a jobs board. It helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who are not actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. And on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and may not have the time or resources to hire. So LinkedIn is constantly finding new ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even quicker and easier. It's probably why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today we are recapping a Jets preseason win. They beat the Washington Commanders 20-17 Saturday at MetLife Stadium. The first of 3 preseason games for the Jets. They have one against the Carolina Panthers coming up this weekend. But I don't really focus on the wins and losses in preseason because the wins and losses, they don't really do a lot for your team. I'm more focused on some of the players, the storylines, the guys who your team's going to count on, and can they show that they can deliver for your team, like Braylon Allen or Olu Fashanu, who we talked about in the first segment. Also, guys who are fighting for depth spots, and I have a couple who I thought played really, really well in this game, and one of them is a guy who's an undrafted free agent, a guy who generated a fair amount of buzz. And with these undrafted free agents, sometimes the buzz pans out, and sometimes it doesn't. And I don't know how it's going to go for Leonard Taylor, but I was impressed. I liked what he did on Saturday. A couple tackles for a loss, including a sack. One, I believe one was in the first half, one was in the second half. Looked explosive. Looked like he used his hands well. To disengage from defenders. I really liked what I saw out of Leonard Taylor. Now, the challenge for him is that the Jets have four veteran defensive tackles on the team. So the question becomes, do they want to carry a fifth? And we've talked a lot about how Robert Saleh likes to rotate defensive linemen in and out. I don't know that means you're necessarily going to carry a fifth defensive tackle. They might. I think, though, that if in a world where they're willing to carry a fifth defensive tackle, that's the type of performance you need. Because I think for the Jets to carry Leonard Taylor, he has to look good enough in preseason. He has to put enough good film out there that the Jets are worried some team's going to poach him. Otherwise, he could go to the practice squad because, ever since, over the last couple of years, the practice squad roster spots have expanded. They're a lot now. They're a lot more than there used to be. I think that, they kind of expanded them during COVID, and they've kind of continued with that expansion going forward. He was an undrafted free agent. So, I don't know that there are a lot of teams that necessarily value him all that highly. But, if he plays like that, he may very well earn a roster spot. Because I thought that was a really encouraging performance. Of course, I understand the caliber of competition was not high. I mean, last week, we spoke with our buddy from Locked On Commanders, who talked about their offensive line not being in very good shape, and one of his sack was in the fourth quarter of the game, so he's going up against guys who really aren't that good. But I think you also have to contextualize who you're going up against, and if you look great against guys who really don't belong in the NFL, that says something good about you. If you look like a man among boys against guys who would struggle to find a practice squad spot, well, that means you're not one of them. That means you're better than them. That means you're a guy who can stick around. Leonard Taylor's got a long way to go, of course. And look, if he doesn't play well the next 2 preseason games, this becomes much easier. But I really liked what he provided. And sometimes these guys, you notice them immediately right off the bat. There are some guys who are undrafted free agents who you notice them like week 1 of preseason, and they make their team. And sometimes they don't contribute to your team until year 2, 3. But you notice something early on, and maybe they need that first year to develop. Maybe they're not ready for real regular season action, but they show you enough to say, what, I deserve a roster spot. And you develop them that first year, then year 2, 3, they really start to stand out. Now, that's a long way off for Leonard Taylor, and I'm not suggesting that we're anywhere close to that, but very encouraging start, and a guy who played well enough that I'm going to keep my eye on him in the next couple preseason games to see what he can do, see if he can earn a roster spot, because that was he was noticeable to me. He was a guy who I felt like was making disruptions pretty constantly. Another guy I thought played well, who we're talking about, Olu Fashanu, who got off to a bad start, and then kind of bounced back after committing a penalty on his first play. Another guy who I'm not sure I could say he got off to a rough start, but guy who had a big completion against him, a corner, Jarek Bernard-Converse, late round pick last year, missed most of his rookie year due to injuries. Jets drafted him as a safety, and they have converted him to corner now. So he started at corner in this game, got a decent amount of playing time. And again, he was in coverage for a big completion against him. Quite frankly, I thought he was in pretty good coverage. I thought Jalen Daniels just threw an outstanding ball. Sometimes we forget there's another team out there trying to win. Sometimes we forget there's another team out there who's trying to make plays. It took a perfect pass for that to be completed. I don't know. I mean, I think Bernard Converse maybe misplayed it a little bit in the air, but I thought he looked pretty good. I mean, outside of that, I thought he was in good coverage there. And the rest of the game, I didn't really see him give up much of anything. And I thought he played well in run support. He showed a willingness to tackle, which you'd expect that from a guy who played safety. Guys who at safety, you got to tackle. So the Jets saw, the fact he was a safety and now he's moving to corner, and he was a bit of a hybrid. He played a little bit both spots in college, but the fact he plays safety shows you he can tackle. Not every corner likes to tackle, and look, you get your corners to cover. Tackling is a bonus, but he covered well. And he was with his man the entire game. We know who the starters are going to be for the Jets. We know that Sauce Gardner, DJ Reed, Michael Carter II. We know those are your three starters. Question is, who's going to be the primary backup? The last couple of years, it's been Brandon Echols, who has starting experience. And I think that you can do worse than Echols for a backup. But look, I mean, it's not like Echols is set in stone as the primary backup here. There's also going to be another spot at corner at least. The Jets will keep at least 5 corners, I'm sure. So there's another spot there for Bernard Converse. And again, understanding that preseason, like as David Harrison told us last week when we did our crossover with Locked On Commanders, Washington's not exactly a team loaded with talent, even in its starting unit this year. And when we get to their backups, not that great. You play the guys who are in front of you. And Bernard Converse is not a guy the Jets are going to lean on to be a starter. They don't need him to shut down the other team's best receiver every week. They're not even going to need him to play most weeks. What they'll need him to do is, if there's an injury, maybe step in for a week or two, hold down the fort. Don't be a disaster, because corner is a spot that loses you games very quickly if you have a guy who can't play. There's just those certain spots on the field. Obviously, quarterback's one of them. Left tackle's another. Corner. Those are the 3 spots where if you have a guy who cannot play, nothing sinks your team faster. So having quality depth at that spot. We know the Jets have quality starters, and I think that they may have quality depth there. Again, Echols is not the worst backup corner in the league, but Bernard Converse, he looked impressive. He looked like he could stick with receivers. Looked like, he was not afraid to mix it up a little bit, not afraid to get physical. I thought there was a lot to like there. Again, we'll see how he does the next 2 weeks. He doesn't play well the next 2 weeks, then everything we say goes out the window. That's life in the NFL, though. The NFL is a week where you got to prove yourself every single week. I liked what he did in this game. I thought these 2 young players on defense, neither of them is a roster lock right now. Well, they were fighting for roster spots, if we're going to be honest. But they've stood out. They're fighting with other guys who did not stand out in the same way. So those are the two guys on the defensive side of the ball who I really liked. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about a guy who, was kind of the hero of the game. I mean, is it fair to summon the name Chris Streveler yet? Probably not. Probably not best to not compare him to the all-time Jets preseason legend, but still a good performance by the quarterback leading a game-winning drive. And we'll talk about him continuing here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Monday. We're breaking down the Jets' 20-17 victory over the Washington Commanders Week 1 preseason action in the year 2024. As I mentioned earlier, do I really care that the Jets won this preseason game? I mean, I guess it's better than losing, but I'm really more focused on the individual performances. That said, I do think that the individual performances do intersect with the win at some points, and I think we're talking about the quarterback, Adrian Martinez, who led the comeback in the fourth quarter. I mean, is it sacrilegious to compare him to the preseason god, Chris Streveler? Yes. Let's see Martinez engineer 2 more preseason game-winning drives the next couple of weeks. But Adrian Martinez, one of the stars. Now, he finishes 6 for 10, 104 yards. Also ran the ball twice for 24 yards, including a key 13-yard scramble. He led a fourth quarter comeback. Jets were down 17-10. Martinez led an 8-play, 75-yard touchdown drive, capped by an Izzy Abanikanda 2-yard touchdown run, and then a 10-play, 56-yard drive to set up the game-winning field goal by Austin Seibert. So Martinez, doing the job. And, if you watched Martinez when he first entered the game, it felt like the stage was too big for him. And to provide context, this was the second half of a preseason game in the NFL. So that's not a very big stage, but it felt like the level of competition was just too big. I mean, it just felt like he was not with it. It felt like he was not comfortable at all. He was not making good throws, not making good reads. And then, I don't know, I guess the bright lights of the fourth quarter kicked in, and suddenly, I mean, he's making tight window throws on the money. He's, extending plays with his legs, looking really good. Now, I think we need to be realistic here. I think as Trevler showed us, or as any number of preseason superstars have shown us through the years, you go back to Brett Ratliff all the way back in 2008, a good performance in preseason, especially when we're talking about the end of a preseason game, does not a great quarterback make in this league. What I would say for Martinez is that he has a long road simply to make the roster, because the Jets are not carrying more than 3 quarterbacks. I think we know that. There will not be more than 3 quarterbacks on the active roster. Now, I think signs are pointing towards Jordan Travis remaining on the non-football injury list during the season. So there might be one quarterback spot that's open, and it's between Andrew Peasley and Martinez. Well, Andrew Peasley entered this game before Martinez, which could be an indication that Peasley's ahead of Martinez in the coach's minds. Now, it could be there even, and next week Martinez enters the game before Peasley. That's something worth watching, but that's not a good sign. Another thing to point out is, again, the competition was not very good. In fact, while, yes, he did start to take the game over in the fourth quarter, that was also the point where Washington had at least talented players on the field. So the quality of the competition certainly went down, and that coincided with Martinez starting to play well. That said, what did Martinez do? He put quality film down for somebody, even if it's not the Jets. If a lot of players get cut during the preseason, a lot of players don't make the 53-man roster. And just putting quality film down, at least that's something the other 31 teams can look at. The tight window throws that he made, the accurate, the on target plays, the extending plays with his legs. Even if the Jets don't think that he's going to be one of their top 3 quarterbacks, maybe that helps him catch on with somebody's practice squad, or maybe it convinces the Jets to keep him. Maybe the Jets think there's something there. Now, look, I think everybody knows Martinez. This is a guy who's very much a developmental quarterback. It's a guy who was available for a long time this offseason. Not a guy who was a coveted player when he was a prospect for the NFL draft. This is a guy who, it's a very long road, and a guy like Martinez is the type of guy who's really hurt by the lack of a developmental league in the NFL. The NFL has got to figure out some way to develop these players. Whether they bring back like a spring/summer league to send players, whether they actually adopt a full-scale minor league system like the other sports all have. Because this is clearly a guy who's going to need reps. If the Jets need to call on Martinez this year, things are probably not going to go well for this team. He's just not there. But, first of all, I always think of these games of the guys who there are guys who are playing these games who are never going to have an NFL career. And if they get to have a moment where they stand out, if they get to have a moment where they're a hero, they'll always be able to tell everyone. They'll be able to tell their kids and grandkids, you know what, I helped win an NFL game, even if it's just preseason. I think it's really cool. I always look for these storylines in the preseason. But second of all, it's at least seeing that there's something there. At least you're seeing some talent there. At least you're seeing him succeed. Even if it's against competition that's not very good, when you're beating competition that's not very good, as I said with Leonard Taylor, it shows that maybe you're a leg above that competition. It shows maybe there's something there. Now, how much is there? I don't know. And again, look, I think we all know that if Adrian Martinez ever sees the field for the Jets this year, they're doomed. That's the reason, Aaron Rodgers is a starting quarterback. They also went out and got Tyrod Taylor because of what happened last year, because they want a quarterback who can run the offense, and they want a veteran. They want somebody who knows what he's doing when he drops back to pass. Adrian Martinez, your third quarterback's typically going to be a developmental guy, and in the longer run, Jordan Travis is probably going to be that guy for the Jets. But with Travis down, maybe there's an opportunity for Martinez to snag that third roster spot. It's still a long road. It's still a very long road for him, but hey, you can't do anything more than lead a comeback win as a quarterback, even if it's just a preseason game. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.